In Charles Dickens' classic novel A Christmas Carol, we see the life of Ebenezer Scrooge, a man as wealthy as he is introverted and hates the whole Christmas season. With help from the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, Scrooge is shown the skewed misconceptions of his own reality and realizes his wrongdoings. Upon the conclusion of the story, he is a changed man, more generous and outgoing and filled with the spirit of Christmas giving. A Christmas Carol has gone on to become one of the most adapted and readapted stories of all time. Its plot is arguably one of the greatest influential tales of Christmas and has since reshaped our very understanding of the holiday and the spirit of giving.
But you were wrong,
I give you the spirit of my goodwill, and I won't let you dampen it. So a Merry Christmas to you anyway, Uncle. Humbug!
In order to understand how we got here, we must first rewind the clock to the Victorian-era time setting of the story. In a recent episode of Unpopular Opinions, the academic agent points out that the time setting of the Industrial Revolution was actually a deflationary period in the economy.
If you look at the data, the 1840s were a deflationary environment. So Bob Cratchit gets a real terms pay increase over the 6 years.
General cost of goods and services was decreasing opposed to the inflationary economy of today, where the price of food, housing, and transportation have all skyrocketed above the rate of increased wages, forcing most of the working middle class to take additional work just to survive. Scrooge is a miserable old miser who hoards his piles of gold, but a decrease of available money in circulation actually serves to keep costs low. A sudden splurge of spending from his own stockpile of gold would actually harm the poor and destitute the most, as the demand for goods and services go up with less available resource. Scarcity causes an inflation to occur, and it becomes increasingly harder for the average citizen to make ends meet. Scrooge is the business owner of a counting house which employs Bob Cratchit, an overworked and underpaid clerk making 15 shillings a week. Scrooge is painted as an evil businessman for his refusal to give Bob a raise, but that judgment is misconstrued. The reality is Cratchit's wage remains constant in a deflating economy, meaning his spending power has actually increased over time. Even though the money he makes on a weekly pay does not increase, the power of that money does. Therefore, one could argue that as Cratchit's quality of life remains the same from year to year to year, then he is the one responsible for the poverty of his own life. In the real world, if the buying power of your money increases but not the quality of your life to match it, then you have no one but yourself to blame. No reasonable person would blame your boss or say that it was their fault for refusing to increase your wage. You are the one who will be blamed for your own inability to budget, save, or invest the money for the future. Furthermore, Scrooge demands that Bob is present for work on Christmas Day, but in reality, millions of Americans are working or are in business calls on the 25th of December, because that is the cold, harsh reality of business, and business stops for no one.
But it was only that you were a good man of business, Jacob.
Business! Mankind was my business. Their common welfare was my business.
The academic agent also mentions the fact that our modern-day interpretation of the Industrial Revolution is wrong. We think of the Victorian era, we picture grungy streets covered in filth, poor people everywhere, and high mortality rates, but that is simply not true. Much of our conception of this reality comes from this one story and its portrayal of the lower class. But in fact, Cratchit is lucky to be working for Scrooge and making what he does. His job could be much worse, as he could be shoveling rocks at the bottom of a mine for fractions of what he's paid now. The time of the Industrial Revolution was a time of immense generation of wealth and prosperity. It's when most of the infrastructure across the country was constructed. Bridges, roads, and cities were built, and there was a demand for work everywhere. Much like the technical revolution of the modern era, there has been an explosion of wealth into the economy in recent years, and the unemployment rate is lower than ever before. That does not exclude, however, the bubble of overworked and underpaid citizens of today, and many are being forced to work 2 or even 3 minimum wage jobs just to survive and get out of debt. It could be worse, they could be without a job or homeless on the street. And if your boss tells you to come work on Christmas Day, you do so without question because you fear the alternative if you were to say no. It's just business, right? Most of the story takes place between the first and second acts, where we are shown Ebenezer's past and Bob Cratchit's present. We learn that Scrooge fell in love and married, only to be later divorced by his wife. She tells them that he has fallen out of love with her and replaced it with a new love for money. We are led to believe that this is somehow bad or negative because Scrooge is self-centered. During the time this was written, divorce was considered an extreme indication that someone was corrupt, but looking through the lens of a modern society, it's just commonplace now. Love is more complex than that, and there is an increasing laundry list of reasons why more and more are now choosing to divorce. Some of those reasons may even be related to the lack of one's drivenness or ability to pursue greater wealth and provide better life for their significant other. A Christmas Carol paints a false dichotomy that money and greed is bad, and you'll just be happy and loved if you were poor. But there are enough people in the world, even in 1844, that there will always be someone willing to remain in a relationship with you, regardless of how rich or poor, kind or cruel or abusive you are. That's why Stockholm Syndrome is a thing. And there are just as many people on either side of the fence who won't like you for who you are. I would know, because I was that guy. Broker than dirt, and I wasn't happy either. I was absolutely miserable.
What are you with a warped, frustrated young man?
And lost 95% of my friends because of it. Not to mention the opportunity to have a relationship with someone I loved very deeply. The truth is, I wasn't rejected because I was some rich-ass, money-loving snob. No, I got rejected because I was broke and ended up homeless, and no amount of love would have saved me. I stood on a soapbox and blamed the whole world for my problems and my inability to get a job. I expected friends to have sympathy for me and help me find a job, but at the end of the day, friends can't pay your bills, and not everyone is in the position to help you get a job either. And it didn't matter how much evidence or proof I could show people that I was being taken advantage of, being abused at work, or that my boss was a criminal. It didn't matter because it was my fault, because it's always my fault, and your actions are your own damn fault too. The Ghost of Christmas Present takes Scrooge to Bob Cratchit's house, where he is made to feel guilty for the poverty the Cratchit family suffers, because he has the money to impact change. But expecting someone else to finance your charity is wrong, and even if Ebenezer and Bob were the bestest of buddies, that doesn't give Bob a right to expect a share of the riches. He worked hard for the money he makes and knows it because of the opportunity that Scrooge presents him for employment, that he can afford as much as he does. Intrinsically, this is something Bob Cratchit understands, as he makes a toast to Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
We see Tiny Tim, one of Bob's children, who supports himself on crutches. Scrooge is told that if Tim doesn't receive the medical attention he needs, that this will likely be his last Christmas on Earth. Scrooge, the employer, is made to feel guilty for not funding the medical bills of one of his employees' children. But in the real world, 44 million Americans can't afford basic health coverage, and you or a member of your family dies as a result of that, then it's your fault because it's always your fault. Your boss is not responsible. We are made to feel that Scrooge is the villain for running a business at any cost without regards for basic human decency, but in reality, your boss doesn't give a shit about you either. What isn't taken into consideration is how the business Scrooge operates impacts so many other people. He provides loans to other people to go and start their own businesses, and rightfully expects a decent return on investment. What isn't considered is the impact those other businesses have toward the greater community as a whole. It actually supports the economy from collapsing to have competition. Say someone applies for a loan from Scrooge to open a new bakery downtown with cheaper prices. Then Mrs. Cratchit receives the benefit of having options to pick from. If the cost of bread is too much at one location, she can go somewhere else, because no one person or shopkeeper in the city has a monopoly on bread. In the sophisticated image of society, Scrooge's abuse of Cratchit would be excused as a necessary cost of business. And so who would care how many Cratchits get steamrolled in the process as long as it's not you, right? In the real world, if you produce something that everyone loves and buys, then you have benefited society. And when you die, you were worshipped as a god. So who the hell cares how many child slaves in Africa had to die building your product, right? The final segment of the story focuses a great deal on death and the public's opinion of Scrooge when he dies. The Ghost of Christmas Future appeals to Scrooge's inherent nature as a human to care what others think of him. But in reality, rich and wealthy people don't care what you think of them.
Did they give a shit about anybody but themselves? No. You care. Did they care what anybody said about them? No. If a newspaper said something bad, they bought the fucking newspaper. Sacked everybody.
Rich and wealthy people don't care what you think of them, and why should they? When you die, you're dead and can't think anyways. Scrooge plays witness to people in a variety of situations following his passing who speak happily of his passing and take little regard for his death, as he himself did upon the passing of his old business partner Jacob Marley. He is upset to learn that no one is sad that he is gone. No one thinks of him kindly now he is gone. But for the majority of most people, they live quiet lives of desperation, and when you die, no one, aside from your direct lineage, will retain the memory of your life, if you are fortunate enough to have even that much. So can't it be argued that it would be better to be remembered than not, regardless of the reason for your remembrance? Trying to adhere to the morality of a culture is futile, because the ethics of your choices are not judged by the standards of your time, but the principles of the culture who is judging you. Yesterday's heroes become today's public enemy number one. Aspects of racism, freedom and expression, and women's rights were not regarded as necessary to protect even as recent as 30 years ago. Actions that were not demonetized at the time have since ruined the lives and careers of so many when subjectively judged through the lens of an increasingly progressive civilization. Changing your life for the purpose of the future humans remembering that you were a good, decent person is senseless, as no one can predict the future. Good and bad are subjective terms, and what society deems appropriate today becomes taboo for the following generations. You would better serve living your life to the fullest extent, whatever that may mean, even if means hoarding vast piles of riches for yourself. If it makes you happy, then it's worth the sacrifice, right? There's a scene where one of the maids of Scrooge steals his bed sheets and tries pawning them off for extra cash. The audience is made to believe that she justifies her actions because Scrooge was a terrible human being, so people look the other way. But the reality of living in poverty is that you'll take whatever from whoever if it's convenient. Scrooge could have died a saint, and that wouldn't have stopped the thieves and criminals of the world from raiding his house for items that would have rightfully belonged to the estate of the family. If it's easy and convenient to take, then most people will, because it's there, and therefore it's mine. Humans lie, cheat, and steal all the time without regard for the people or the lives they harm in the process.
This is what protects him from the world.
The stolen shipment had a month's supply worth about $5,000.
This isn't a reflection on the life of a fictional miser, it's a justification for his actions in a society that has come to favor those who abuse, those who would take advantage of and screw anyone to get ahead. That is why you are wrong about Scrooge, because he played the game of life better than anyone else according to the rules. But what does that mean about the morality of the game if screwing your fellow man makes your life more beneficial? This Christmas, stop to consider all the times you abused someone because it suited you. And if it turns out that you are the Scrooge to another person, consider their perspective for a second. Can you live with yourself knowing what you sacrificed your own morality to get where you are now? And have a very Merry Christmas.
Humbug!